At the medical school, a big part of my role, and one of the reasons that they brought me on board, was the integration of families, per se, and health. And originally trained as a marriage and family therapist, medical family therapist as a specialty, that made sense. And so the partnership with the Department of Family Medicine and me was a good fit. Okay? And as I was starting to get my feet wet in terms of research and in terms of engagement around families with health, one of the main things that started to come out of this was this understanding that most of the time as it relates to chronic health conditions is that the care isn't done by the providers. I mean, if I break my leg, I'm going to go to the emergency room and you're going to fix me. And you know what? That's great. I'm going to lie there and wait for you to do that. But if I have diabetes or if I have chronic pain, most of the care, most of the work is done outside of the physician's office. It's not done by the professional. And in some ways, that was humbling because I went to school for a very, very long time, okay? I have an awful lot of letters at the end of my name that from the outside in might frame me as expert. But if I don't have diabetes, or if I don't have chronic pain, if I don't have cancer, if I haven't lived through or lived with any variety of these chronic types of conditions or health-related behaviors, I'm not the expert, okay? And as it relates to citizen healthcare, or the Families and Democracy Project, we have, as we build this ship as we sail it, like we always say, have really come to understand that in the healthcare conversations, the biggest untapped resource in healthcare is the knowledge and the wisdom and the energy of the very people that we go to school for to try to help. And if that energy and that wisdom isn't part of the equation, then I would argue ultimately we're going to fail, especially as it relates to the chronic stuff. I mean, not the broken leg, but the rest of healthcare, I think that we're going to miss something. And if I had all day, I could tell you the long version of the story. But as we started then to engage with different communities around health issues, and this wisdom, which in some ways is so obvious, but I think this idea gets trained out of us in graduate school in some regards, okay? As this wisdom has come more into our awareness, the importance and the power of community, not just family, okay, has been front and center part of our own dialogue and our own narrative as it relates to a variety of projects that we have created. You know, and I know in the handouts on your tables, there's a list of the projects. In the Citizen Professional Center, there's 13 or 14, I can't remember, projects that are guided by the types of principles that we outline and that we put forth and permeate all of the work that we do. And oftentimes we frame ourselves as have model, will travel, okay? Because it's a way, citizen professionalism is a way of engaging with communities. And it can connect with any variety of content areas in any variety of communities. And none of our projects side by side look the same, but they're all guided by these principles. The very first one, again, that the greatest untapped wisdom does not come from us as professionals. Okay? And what I want to do is walk you through some of the other tenets of the work that we do as one way of doing this type of work, and then highlight a couple of the projects in a little bit more detail than the little abstract that you might have in your handout. Okay? Second, people must be engaged as co-producers of healthcare for themselves and their communities, not just as patients or consumers of those services. I think that most of healthcare is a provider-consumer model. Okay? People come to us to get fixed. Now, and I'll just self-disclose, those of us in academia know this, that every time you write a paper or every time you write a research project, you have to go and review the literature, right? You have to create your background and significance section, okay? And so as it relates to this, one of the things that I found the most frustrating is that I'm going to go review literature on community interventions on whatever topic I'm involved with, and I'm involved with a variety of different topics, okay, is that most of the projects out there that I've found that are community-based projects, okay, are extraordinary projects. I mean, they've done amazing things, and they've connected with communities in different ways, and they've created these dynamite interventions. And then they fizzle and die as soon as the grant runs out, or as soon as the charismatic leader leaves, retires, dies, or moves on to another project. And what I would argue is that if a community project depends on a grant that you wrote as a professional, or on your charisma as a leader to get everybody together and get them going, and that's what's holding it together, that it's not really a community project in the type of sustainable way that we're after here. Okay? And healthcare as we know it is changing. I mean, it's a moving target, and the issue of money is always on our minds. And if our community engagement hinges around money, then we're in trouble. And part of the narrative and part of the discussion as it relates to all the citizen professional projects from the first meeting forward is how can this function with or without funding, and how can this function when all of us here at the table are gone? Professionals play a catalytic role in fostering citizen initiatives when they develop their public skills. Now, there's a whole lot to that, okay? I think that graduate school, I'll just speak for myself, trained me to be the expert, okay? And oftentimes when we're around the table with community members starting some of these earlier conversations, okay, a question might come up and everybody turns to me to answer it, right? And I was very happy to be asked earlier on, right? And then as I've learned this model, okay, is that I've been kicked under the table, stomped on to not talk, right? And we kind of have this mantra that if there's somebody else in the room that knows the answer, you probably shouldn't jump in, okay? Because there's this, I mean, just as professionals have learned to start the conversations or even lead the conversations, our patients have learned to be passive, right? And so we can start the conversation, but the public skills of this work are to get out of the way just as much as they are to lead or to answer, okay? If you begin with an established program, you're not going to end up with an initiative that's owned and operated by citizens. Now, for example, most of the work, if you do the math that I've been involved with, is in diabetes, okay? So we have the Partners in Diabetes, we have the Angels, the Neighbor Giving Encouragement, Love, and Support. We're all about acronyms. We have the FEDS, Family Education Diabetes Series, and a lot of people then will look at, from the outside in, one of our projects and go, wow, you're doing awesome work. That's so cool. How can we replicate this in our community? And I said, you can't, right? I mean, and it kind of goes against what they taught us in graduate school, because everything is worth more if it's repeated time and again by other investigators, right? But if you're going to tap the unique resources and wisdom of a community, how can you replicate it? I mean, that's the have model will travel, is that you go into a particular community and you say, what's going on here? And you have conversations just as much about the assets than as you do about what's wrong. I mean, you don't go in and do a needs assessment and go, oh God, you guys are screwed up. You know, what's going on here? What are the unique strengths, the resources, the attributes, the energies that are here? And that's why you can have diabetes projects in different areas in different communities that don't look anything alike each other, because you're owning it, operating it, and fine-tuning it and personalizing it into that community. It's not a replicable project. It's a replicable process. I hope that makes sense, okay? Local communities, and this is part of that, must retrieve their own historical, cultural, religious traditions in health and healing and bring these into the dialogue with contemporary med systems. So, I know all about diabetes in a Western medicine framework, but how do we do that in the context of talking circles with our American Indian communities, or in the context of games or adolescent-driven initiatives with our Angels Project? Oh, that's coming from them, right? And as we tap those unique resources and strengths, not just so we can say, oh, this is a, community X, so we must do Y. No. So we open the conversations up so community X can do Y, not so we can integrate it because we are being culturally sensitive. That isn't, oftentimes that can even backfire, because it looks like you read a book and now you know all about a community, and communities can see through that pretty quickly, okay? So citizen initiatives should have a bold vision. We call it a BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. Okay? At the same time, working pragmatically on specific projects. And as the therapist in me, this really resonates, because when I see people clinically, we always have a BHAG, to conquer depression, to save our marriage, That's big, and that's something that's like on the horizon and that's going to guide us, okay? But every step of the way is an essential step towards that goal. Now, if you can imagine yourself in a field, don't do this when anybody's watching, you'll look funny. But if you look at the horizon and you run to it, you're going to trip over something. And if you only look at what's in front of your feet, you're going to wander around and never get there. And you're always going with both. And as it relates to our community work and our community engagement, yes, we have BHAGs. We're going to eliminate the health disparities in diabetes around or in the American Indian community. How are we going to do that? One powwow, one meeting, one feds project at a time. And that's an extraordinary balance because every single step of the way is an affirmation of success on a mission that's something bigger, again, from a few slides ago, than any of us in the room, okay? Now, there's, again, a variety of examples of projects with the have model, will travel type of approach that we do, and I just want to highlight a couple of them to give you a better sense of what these look like in real life instead of the academic stuff that I've already presented here so far. Students, remember, it's all about acronyms. Students Against Nicotine, Tobacco, and Addiction, the Santa Project. This is in partnership with the Job Corps. You guys know over the State Fair, across the street from the St. Paul campus, those big brick buildings, that's the Job Corps. Now, the Job Corps as a educational site has, for a long time, really struggled with smoking. And, and you can go and do that literature review and you can find out that, 20 or 30% of the general population smokes. That's bad. But at the Job Corps, it's like 60 to 70%. And it's a fishbowl community. The students live there. It's dormitory life. They don't have the resources to go in and out like, students at the university do, where they go home to their apartments or their dorms. Okay? So everybody's there and everybody's smoking. And they've been trying for years to stop this, okay, through top-down provider service delivery approaches, and nothing's working. They have nicotine replacement therapies, they have quit plan, they've collaborated with a variety of organizations to get resources and pamphlets and medicines and patches, and nothing's working. And they then invited me and a colleague of mine, Pete Harper, a physician, to say, we heard you have this model, and we heard you'll travel. Can you talk with us about whether or how you could work to address smoking in this community because we see it as a big problem? Now, this was coming from the administrators. And I said, sure, I'll come and have conversations, but I don't know if it's going to work. Because you know what? If the students don't think it's a problem, then it's not going to. And we're always looking for what we call pressure points. And if and as everybody can rally around a problem, they don't have to rally around it for the same reasons. But if they do, then we can go to the next step and the one after that. And so we held meetings with students, with teachers, with faculty, administration, et cetera, and everybody agreed it was a problem. The administrators, because their mission is to get these students jobs. And they know that if you show up to a job interview smelling like smoke, you're not going to get hired. There's actually data that show that. Equal opportunity stuff aside, I mean, they just see dollar signs going up when you come in smelling like smoke, right? But the students were concerned about the health or the health of others that they cared about. The teachers were concerned because students are late or missing classes because they can't get back and forth from the smoking gazebo in between classes. So everybody agreed it was a problem. And so then we asked the question, can we do something about it? And the students said, we're glad you asked, okay? And so these are some of the students with Santa, but I think this is a more realistic version of what this group is, okay? And that's one of the most engaging things about all these projects is that oftentimes it doesn't even feel like I'm working. This is so much fun when we flatten our hierarchies out and we say, let's work together on something because I went to school and I have something to contribute, but you're experiencing this and you have something to contribute that I never could. And together we can create something that I couldn't do without you and you couldn't do without me, okay? And so the students said, let's talk to and interview every student on campus. And we said, every student on campus, are you serious? And they said, yes. And we're about 24 of these interviews, surveys in, and we've never had a response rate less than 85%, which is very cool, but it's because the students are doing it. And they started to recognize that it wasn't smoking as the problem. It was stress and it was boredom. Because they can't go anywhere. There's nothing to do. They go to class till 3 o'clock and then they just hang out. So they smoke. And so they said, if you want to We're not stupid. We know that smoking is bad. Look at any bus that drives by with a sign on it. Look at the commercial. God, I mean, you can't look at an ad or pick up a pack of cigarettes and miss, unless you're blind, that big whole thing that says, this is going to kill you. We know it's bad, but we're bored and we're stressed out. And you know what? When we go home for the holidays, we don't smoke. When we come back to Job Corps, we do. And the administrators are going, really? Damn. Then we need to address boredom. We need to address stress. And the students are like, exactly. And the administrator said, well, we could do this, this, and this. And I pulled back on the administrators and said, let this be the students. And so they started to create, administration started to support a variety of activities across campus, okay, to address stress and boredom. Oftentimes having absolutely nothing to do with smoking. Sometimes having to. Like our drama club did an assembly with a big play about smoking, okay? But then nobody's talking about smoking when they're playing volleyball. They're jumping around playing volleyball, okay? But the point is, we started to create a culture of fun activities that was targeting stress and boredom, and at the same time watching smoking in the background go down, okay? And then, consistent with CBPR, community-based participatory research, always feeding results back to the students, as we call cussing and discussing. We did a survey once all about sexual problems and behaviors, and we found out how much more of them the smokers had. That hit a newsletter, and then that created a buzz. Oh, having some problems there, are you? And that's kind of the point, is that there's this constant interaction with data and this constant sense of co-ownership about everything that means. These are t-shirts, and there's a variety of them. This is an example of one. Job Corps is a uniform school. Any of you went to a school that you wore a uniform know that that's kind of boring. Every day you got to wear your khaki pants and your blue shirt. The only exception to breaking the Job Corps' dress code is if you wear a Santa t-shirt, okay? And it makes it cool, and students don't like these uniforms, so they love wearing the Santa t-shirts. And all of the artwork and all of the, well, as you saw it with the posters, et cetera, are created by the students. And then we send the templates off to the t-shirt company, and then students get to see their art in the t-shirts, okay? Now, as we look at findings, absolutely, we are seeing reductions in smoking. We have to follow them by cohorts because no student is ever there longer than about a year. And so any snapshot data of how the community is doing isn't going to show a whole lot because there's brand new students that just showed up and haven't been exposed to Santa yet, and there's a whole bunch of students that were benefiting from it that just graduated. So as we follow students by cohort, and this is a statistical nightmare, there's a special place in heaven for our biostats people that work with me on this. Any of the stats that you took in grad school will not help you with the Santa project. But we're seeing readiness to change. We're seeing reductions in smoking behaviors in terms of frequency or amount of cigarettes smoked and ultimate cessation as we follow them by cohorts. And the activities to address stress and boredom are what's doing it. And what we've found as we've compared, as we've asked students to talk about which activities they're in and then comparing that with the dependent variables of smoking behavior, is that actually the non-physical activities are outperforming the physical activities. So arts and crafts and drama are doing a better job than volleyball or basketball. Now that was surprising to a lot of the students. We gave it back and said, God, we're kind of surprised about this. And the students said, we're not. Because when, you know what, when we're doing art and we're doing crafts or we're creating a play about smoking, we're talking about how much it sucks. And you can't sit down and get the social support in the same ways as you can when you're playing basketball or volleyball. It helps, but we absolutely agree that the social, more social activities are going to come out of the ones that are less physical. Okay? And so now, as we go into the next steps, Job Corps is really ramping up and trying to integrate more contexts of social support in activities to address the stress and boredom than they ever have. Quickly, another example of Have Model Will Travel, Family Education Diabetes Series. This is in the American Indian community, and they called this the Feds on Purpose. The American Indian people, and this has been a huge learning for me outside of a textbook, talking with community elders and community leaders, have experienced extraordinary trauma through the experience of colonization, and oftentimes, and most oftentimes, in relation to our federal government and university research institutions. And so here I am with a university research institution, in fact, the biggest one in the state. and they have absolutely no reason to trust us. Long story short, Partners in Diabetes, which is a different project, there were a couple of American Indian elders that were connected to it and challenged me and others to have some conversations with elders in the community about diabetes. Because if you do go back to that literature review, there is no ethnic or cultural group that's harder hit by diabetes than American Indian people. Nobody. General population, 6–7% are American Indian groups, 40 to 50% prevalence of diabetes. Urban dwelling is the highest, with the highest health disparities, and most of the research has been done on reservation context, so we do not know what we're doing. And so we spent almost 2 years talking with elders, going to powwows, and learning, instead of charging in blow in a China store with our information, and gaining trust to engage in and with this community to create something that, again, I couldn't as a professional, but they couldn't as community members. Together, we could, and the Feds is what we did. This is in partnership with the St. Paul Area Council of Churches. Its Department of Indian Work is in the back half of the building. And what we do in the Feds is that the community comes together. HIPAA would lose its mind. Because this is a collective community, and this is our problem, and we see this as a we issue, not an I issue. And so the community comes together, everybody's got their folder, and they go around and they weigh each other, they check blood, they calculate each other's BMIs, right? They give each other a hard time if they're gaining weight, or they applaud each other if they're losing it, okay? Then we eat together meals that are consistent with American Indian cultures, plural, at the same time that we're talking about the portion sizes, how we made it, where to get it, how much it costs, okay? And then the E is the education part of the Feds, and it's a series of 16 community gatherings, and then we do 16 more. And the first one, we all, as a community, say, what are we going to do? Not me as the provider saying, I know what you need to learn. And every time, then, the education part, or the content of the Feds per se, looks different. And these are examples of the topics that the group comes up with. Okay? This isn't me designing an intervention or a curriculum and asking them to come. We seriously sit there with big Post-it notes and flip charts and everything, talking about what's important to the group itself about managing a chronic illness that will not go away. Okay? And all of the presentations and the education per se is co-led between a Western provider and an American Indian community member, and it's done in the context of, again, talking circles, native dance, native games, a variety of culturally driven or reclaimed traditions that have been lost along the way with Western education or Western medicine. And as we've looked at pilot findings, we have found across the board improvement with, and a number of my physician colleagues that have been involved with this have said, these were patients, and I don't mean to sound bad, but I thought we're never going to get better. You know, because if they don't get better and, you know, quote unquote, they're non-compliant because they're not doing what we say, okay, and now, oh my gosh, look at them. And our average weight loss is about 20 pounds in 6 months. We followed people sustainable 2 years out, and it's still there. Our average metabolic control of our groups is consistently statistically significant, and I would argue clinically, within usually 3 months and oftentimes within 6. It takes usually 3 to change, but most of our participants that are in the Feds longer than 6 months have metabolic control or hemoglobin A1C between 7 and 8%, which is a clinical goal. And none of the participants in the Feds are engaged in primary care or in any kind of insulin or medication. They can't afford it. They don't have access to health care, or they don't trust health care in the ways that we would see it. So the Feds is their intervention, and so they kind of serve as a natural control group. And one of the things that we're doing now is that we're, long story short, is that the next phase is, okay, you got pilot data, okay, now do a randomized controlled trial, to which the elders say, no. You know, how could we invite members of our community to our program and then eeny, meeny, miny, moe them into a waitlist control group and say, you can't participate? That would be Western medicine coming in, benefiting itself and doing research on us instead of with us. And so the Electronic Primary Care Research Network, a colleague of mine, Kevin Peterson at the medical school, helped create this. We're working to use virtual control groups of electronically matched American Indian patients in metropolitan areas that are the same age, same comorbidities, et cetera, but are not geographically connected to the feds. And so, and they've signed, obviously, the consent to be researched as comparison groups with primary care. That's the next step that we're doing. And and that everything I just said right there took about almost a year to figure out. But that was the point, is that we, as professionals and community members, figured that out together. Okay? Improved dietary choices and food intake, that's looking at labels, that's portion sizes, and everything that goes along with the physical activity. And similar with the FEDS project, or with the Santa project, most of the impact that we're seeing is actually being connected to the social support. We just did, a big study where we did qualitative interviews in the context of talking circles, and basically asked, we said, the feds is kind of a blunt instrument, so what's getting your traction on all of this great outcome data that you're seeing? So we asked, because I didn't know. And what the community said was that it was the sense of social support and social accountability to the group, because they come up with a lot of different activities that facilitate that. For example, right now we're having a race where we've divided the feds in half, and they're racing each other across the latitudinal, that's a weird word, distance of the United States, because everybody's got pedometers, right? And so if I don't walk, I'm going to show up to the feds and everybody's going to give me a hard time because I'm not walking, right? Well, and then if you're walking, your health and everything that's connected to that is going to improve. I think that citizen professional work is truly, and I said this before, working with communities instead of on them. And it's been very humbling for me to go to school as long as I did and to be in a position of co-creating. But that's absolutely what we should do. And as we flatten the hierarchies out like that, then my expertise represents certainly a part of the picture, but a part of a much bigger picture of a mosaic of wisdom, energy, knowledge, resources that oftentimes gets missed if we don't flatten the hierarchy out and we lead the show as the expert. Okay? That's what I got. Thank you.